September 490 BC, a battle which would forever change the world took place. On the shores of Attica, east of Athens, saw what is perhaps one of the most famous and influential battles in history. The Battle of Marathon. Marathon. It is a battle that few haven't heard of. Popular legend tells it as a battle which would decide the fate of Western civilization and save democracy. But is this really true? What really happened at the Battle of Marathon? Welcome to Marathon Revisited, where we take another approach of telling the story of this battle and bring to light this massive historical event. Hi, my name's Adam, I'm an ancient Greek reenactor and history enthusiast, and I invite you to please join me today as we revisit the Battle of Marathon. Founded during the 6th century BC, the Persian Empire dominates much of the Middle East and parts of Africa. The empire continued to grow and move towards the Aegean. In 499 BC, a once Greek polis called Miltos in Ionia began to revolt against the Persians. This would kick off the chain of uprisings which would be named the Ionian Revolt. Word of this would spread to mainland Greece, a plea for aid against the much larger Persian Empire. Two cities responded to this call, Eretria and Athens. The forces of Athens and Eretria helped the rebels take one of the Persian capitals in the region, Sardis. However, this act of aid would be the spark for a much larger fire. Though the Persian Empire seemingly gets portrayed as a harsh, dominating society, life under Persian rule was, on the whole, good. This culture was advanced in science, architecture, and even saw democratic structures which many people seem to have forgotten. They did have to pay taxes, however they had many freedoms. From a Persian perspective, the Ionian rebels were uprising against Persian citizens, and the capture of Sardis was not to be taken lightly. After crushing the revolt, the cities from mainland Greece became Darius' next priority, Eretria, but more so, Athens. Darius sent a fleet of approximately 600 ships. On their way, they sacked many smaller coastal islands, including Naxos and Delos, two islands which were not far from Athens, and then set their ships on course to Eretria. After a slight struggle, Eretria was sacked, punished for their aid to the Ionian Revolt. The next target was Athens. The fleet sailed towards Attica and nestled on a beach called Marathon, roughly 40 kilometers away from Athens. It was here, in the autumn of 490 BC, that one of the most famous battles of history took place. The Persian fleet, commanded by Datis and Artaphernes, great generals of Darius, arrived at Marathon in the very late summer of 490 BC. Their role was not only to punish Athens, who broke their truce with Persia, but also to install a puppet king, the exiled Athenian politician Hippias, the son of Pisistratus the tyrant. Hippias, who was banished in 510 BC, fled to Persia, and shortly after, Athens began putting into place the very first stones of its democracy. Because we commonly take the side of the Athenians in the battle, the Persian side is much too neglected. Not long after the exile of Hippias, Athens faced threat from other Greek polis, or city-states. They then asked for help from the Persian Empire, offering earth and water as a token of submission, which was broken after they aided the Ionians. The Persian fleet landed at Marathon for a multitude of reasons. The plains allowed for the use of cavalry, something the Greeks lacked massively, and it was also Hippias' hometown, and they had planned to gather local support. It did not take long for the word of the Persians' arrival to get to Athens, and naturally the people began to fear for the worst. There was one voice of hope, however, a general called Miltiades, who had just returned from abroad and was familiar with Persian troops. Athens was in desperate need of soldiers, so much so that they offered any slave freedom if they took up arms. After deciding to fight, Athens sent out the famous runner Philippides to other Greek cities, including Sparta, the opposite end of Greece some 200 kilometers away. The Spartans had to decline the call as they were in the midst of a religious festival which prohibited war. Their call was, however, answered by the small town of Plataea, which sent a force of around 1,000 hoplites, a massive sum of troops considering the size of the polis. The Athenian army, accompanied by many slaves, marched to the plains of Marathon to block the progression of Persian troops. The location of the Athenian camp and the battle itself is not completely known. There are two leading options. The first one, along the foothills of Penteli, close to the modern town of Rana, or closer to the coast at the foothills of Mount Agrelikai, a longer but broader bottleneck to Athens. After the Greeks set up camp, neither side dared to attack, and the waiting game was at large. Herodotus gives the numbers of the Persian army as 200,000, however this is completely exaggerated. Modern estimates also range widely, but seemingly put this number to close to 25 to 50,000. The Athenian force was said to have around 9,000 to 11,000 soldiers. There is no set answer as to why this stalemate occurred. Herodotus states that there were 10 Athenian generals, one for each of the founding tribes of Athens, and they did not come upon a decision whether to attack or not. To deal with this dispute, it was said that each day command was passed to a different general. Miltiades was amongst the most vocal for attack, and had managed to get other generals to side with him, so they agreed that come the day of his command cycle, they would launch their attack. Another possible explanation is that the Athenians were going to hold out as long as possible, in the hopes that the Spartans' festival would run its course and they could send aid. Another option is that they waited for an opportune moment, for instance when the Persian cavalry were out of the question. Herodotus makes it clear that one of the reasons the Persians chose Marathon was for cavalry use. However, he makes no mention of the cavalry being used in the battle, which could indicate they were not present the day of the attack. Miltiades' command day rolled around, and the Battle of Marathon was about to begin. The Athenians arranged their force in an unusual way. Either by ingenious plan or out of necessity, Miltiades arranged the troops that the flanks were of regular depth, most likely 8 men deep, but the centre was thinned, likely to around 4 men deep. This was in part done in an attempt to make the Athenian battle line match the Persians, as one sure way for a phalanx to be beat was to be flanked. However, this act of thinning the centre would later, out of sheer luck or immense strategy, prove vital to the Athenian force later in the battle. The formation looked something like this. The 1,000 hoplites from Plataea held the left flank, in the middle, Miltiades, and on the right flank, the position of honour, the Athenian polemarch called Callimachus. There was more than 1 kilometre between the Greek and Persian forces, and Herodotus writes that they charged the enemy at a full run covering this distance. Though this is perhaps romanticised, the Greeks did definitely run for the final stretch. This was likely done to minimise their exposure to the Persian archers. The Persians watched, astonished as they saw the outnumbered Greeks take the offensive. Across a front of about a mile wide, the two armies clashed in brutal combat, the sounds of cries, metal against metal, and the splintering of wood echoing throughout. Sadly, it is here where the ancient writers lose much of their in-depth details, and it can only really be left to us to piece together what we think it may have looked like. Herodotus does tell us that the battle lasted a long time, and the small Greek force fought in a manner worthy of renown. What is clear, however, is the centre of the Persian force, held by the finest troops of the empire, began to push back the thin centre of the Greek line, but the Greek flanks managed to beat back their foes. The centre of the Athenian army broke and began to flee, and the Persians chased. Miraculously, the Greek flanks, after letting the retreating Persians run to their ships, regrouped and turned their spears towards the Persian centre. Though the Greek flanks were separated by hundreds of metres, they managed to reform and charge the Persians. It was at this point that the battle turned into more of a chase, with fleeing Athenians under the pursuit of attacking Persians, who themselves were being chased by the rest of the Athenian army. This continued all the way to the sea. Sadly, the details here are unknown. It is possible that the Persian centre managed to push through the Greeks in their will to escape, or the Persian centre was completely decimated and the Greek force rallied to attack the fleeing members. Unfortunately, this is unknown. Despite the options, the fleeing Persians, surrounded by the dead of their comrades and fleeing allies, held little defence against the pursuing Greeks. On the other hand, the the Greeks were filled with great energy from the coming victory and slaughtered much of the retreating foe. It was said that many Athenians became so focused on killing the fleeing army that one even let his arm get cut off whilst holding a Persian clambering onto his ship. The battle was over, not without loss and consequence, but victory nonetheless belonged to the Greeks. The runner Philippides then ran all the way back to Athens, some 40 kilometers away, where we get the modern marathon from, and announced Nike, or victory. What they don't like to publicise is that he then collapsed dead from exhaustion. Though the Battle of Marathon may have been won by the Greeks, the Persian threat still remained prevalent. The remaining Persian army began to sail round to attack the now undefended city of Athens. After hearing this, the Athenian army marched double time back to Athens and occupied the walls. The Persian fleet arrived, taken by surprise as their eyes fed on the glinting armour of the Athenian and Plataean forces. The Persians, not willing to face the very same soldiers who had just defeated them, turned their ships away and retreated back across the Aegean. According to Herodotus, the Greek force only lost 192 soldiers, whereas the Persians lost some 6,400. Though ancient writers are notorious for blasting these out of proportion, these numbers seem decently credible, as much of the Greek dead was from the centre, and the Persians were slaughtered after they fell into disarray. I had the pleasure and privilege of being able to walk on this battlefield, and managed to view the burial mounds. Sadly, the tomb of the Plataeans and Athenians from Marathon were gated off. However, they would have looked something like this, and when excavated, like this. This event is commonly told as democracy's first battle, where they managed to beat back the invading barbarian hordes. However, as touched upon earlier, the Persians were quite advanced and brought many democratic elements to the places it ruled. There is perhaps another version of this battle, where the Persians did win and took over Athens, and though they had their differences, it is important to be able to view this from both sides. Perhaps if Persia had taken over Greece, they would have stopped them from warring with each other, putting an end to the Peloponnesian War, and actually advanced the world more so than if they hadn't. Of course, it is impossible to tell for certain, but it is interesting to think about. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully you learned or managed to take away some interesting details. If you'd like to support the channel further, please consider subscribing or checking out the historical based merch items from my store. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you in the next video.